In a world spinning faster each day, where notifications ping like restless monks seeking attention, and where we've somehow convinced ourselves that multitasking is a virtue rather than a recipe for madness, the ancient words of Siddhartha Gautama, better known as the Buddha, arrive like a cool breeze through a cluttered mind. Here was a man who traded a palace for homelessness, luxury for uncertainty, and a guaranteed comfortable life for the wildly unreasonable quest of understanding why we all suffer so much. Spoiler alert, he figured it out, and his discoveries remain as relevant today as they were 2,500 years ago, perhaps even more so now that we've added smartphones to our suffering. Let's start with the delicious irony of Siddhartha's story. Born into royalty, he had what every self-help guru today promises their followers: wealth, pleasure, security, and presumably an excellent healthcare plan. His father, King Shuddhana, went to extraordinary lengths to shield young Siddhartha from anything unpleasant. It was like growing up in the world's most elaborate bubble wrap, a controlled environment where suffering was simply not on the menu. But here's the thing about truth: it has a way of finding you, even if you're hiding behind palace walls. During a series of ventures outside his gilded cage, Siddhartha encountered what became known as the Four Sights: an old person, a sick person, a corpse, and a wandering ascetic. Most of us see these things before lunch on any given Tuesday, but for Siddhartha, they were revelatory. He realized that his comfortable life was built on a foundation of denial, that suffering was not an aberration but a fundamental feature of existence. So what did he do? At age 29, he walked away from it all. The palace, the wife, the newborn son, the whole package. Now, before we nominate him for Father of the Year, let's understand what he was really doing. He was refusing to pass on unconsciousness to another generation. He was saying, I will not raise my son in the same ignorance I was raised in. I will find the truth first, then I'll have something real to offer. It's the ultimate dropout story. Except instead of starting a tech company, he started a revolution in consciousness. After leaving the palace, Siddhartha did what any earnest spiritual seeker might do. He went completely overboard in the opposite direction. For 6 years, he practiced extreme asceticism, essentially torturing his body in the belief that enlightenment could be beaten out of the flesh like dust from an old rug. He ate so little that, according to legend, when he touched his stomach, he could feel his spine. This is relatable, isn't it? We do the same thing constantly. Overeat, then crash diet, overwork, then burn out, overstimulate, then seek complete withdrawal. We're like human pendulums, swinging wildly from one extreme to another, never finding that sweet spot in the middle. Buddha's great insight, even before his full enlightenment, was that this approach was just as foolish as his previous life of luxury. Starving yourself doesn't lead to wisdom. It just leads to being angry and possibly hallucinating. So he accepted a bowl of rice pudding from a village girl named Sujata, the unsung hero of Buddhism, and formulated what would become one of his core teachings: the middle way. The middle way isn't about being lukewarm or uncommitted. It's about recognizing that extremes are seductive but ultimately unproductive. It's about finding that path between self-indulgence and self-mortification, between clinging and aversion, between the story that you're everything and the story that you're nothing. Think about it. We live in a culture of extremes. Everything is either the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. We're either crushing it or crashing. We optimize, maximize, and supersize. The middle way whispers something radical. Maybe just enough. Under the Bodhi tree, the night everything changed. After abandoning extreme asceticism, Siddhartha sat down under a fig tree, later called the Bodhi tree, and made a declaration that would make any modern productivity coach weep with admiration. I will not rise from this seat until I have attained enlightenment. No backup plan, no exit strategy, just pure commitment. What happened under that tree has been described in countless ways, from the poetic to the mystical to the psychological. He was tempted by Mara, the personification of delusion and desire, who threw everything at him. Sensual pleasures, fear, doubt, the whole arsenal of human weakness. But Siddhartha sat through it all, observing these arising phenomena without being swept away by them. And then, as dawn broke, he saw it. He understood the fundamental nature of reality, the chain of causation that binds us to suffering, and the way to liberation. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. Here's what makes this story so powerful. Buddha didn't gain anything under that tree. He didn't acquire some special knowledge from outside himself. Instead, he removed the veils of ignorance that had been obscuring what was already there. Enlightenment wasn't about addition. It was about subtraction. It was about seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time in human history, the actual mechanics of suffering and liberation, the Four Noble Truths, the diagnosis, and the cure. After his enlightenment, Buddha spent 45 years teaching, and at the core of his teaching were the Four Noble Truths. They're structured like a medical diagnosis, because Buddha was essentially a doctor of the soul, and a rather good one at that. First noble truth: life involves suffering. This sounds depressing until you realize it's actually liberating. Buddha wasn't saying life is only suffering or that suffering is somehow noble or good. He was saying, look, let's start with reality. Things are often unsatisfactory. Even pleasant experiences are tinged with suffering because they're impermanent. That amazing meal ends. That perfect vacation ends. That new relationship energy fades. Everything changes, and our resistance to that change causes suffering. The word dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it's more subtle than that. It includes dissatisfaction, stress, anxiety, and that vague feeling that something isn't quite right, even when things seem fine. It's the itch we can't scratch, the thirst we can't quench, the feeling that if we could just get that one thing, then we'd finally be happy. They wouldn't be. Second noble truth: the cause of suffering is craving. Here's where Buddha gets really interesting. Suffering doesn't come from the external world, it comes from our relationship to the external world. It's our craving, our clinging, our desperate grasping at experiences, and our equally desperate pushing away of other experiences. We crave pleasure and flee from pain. We crave existence and fear non-existence. We crave recognition certainty, control, permanence in a universe that offers none of these things reliably. And this craving is like a fire that consumes us. The more we feed it, the hungrier it gets. Think about your own life. How much of your suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are? The traffic should move faster. People should appreciate you more. Your body should look different. Your partner should change. The weather should cooperate. The past should have been different. The future should be certain. Buddha is saying all that wanting is what's killing you. Third noble truth: there is an end to suffering. This is the good news. If craving causes suffering, then the cessation of craving leads to the cessation of suffering. This isn't about becoming a passionless zombie or no longer caring about anything. It's about letting go of the desperate quality of wanting, the addiction to having things be a certain way. It's the difference between enjoying an ice cream cone and desperately needing an ice cream cone, between appreciating a beautiful sunset and trying to capture it perfectly on Instagram so others will validate your experience, between loving someone and clinging to them in fear. This truth tells us that liberation is possible, that we're not doomed to suffer forever, that there's a way out of the hamster wheel. Fourth noble truth: the path to the end of suffering. MAGA. And here's the instruction manual. The Noble Eightfold Path. It's not 8 separate things, but 8 aspects of a complete way of living. Right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right here doesn't mean morally correct in some rigid sense. It means aligned, appropriate, skillful actions that lead toward liberation rather than deeper entanglement. Impermanence, the truth we know but keep forgetting. One of Buddha's most persistent teachings was about impermanence, anicca. Everything changes. Everything. Your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your relationships, your circumstances, civilizations, planets, galaxies, all of it is in constant flux. We intellectually understand this, yet we live as if the opposite were true. We treat our current situation as if it will last forever. When we're happy, we can't imagine being sad. When we're sad, we can't imagine being happy again. We photograph everything, trying to hold on to moments that have already passed. We make plans as if the universe has agreed to cooperate with our calendar. Buddha suggested that deeply understanding impermanence isn't depressing, it's freeing. If everything changes, then your current suffering will change too. That embarrassing thing you said, it will fade. That loss you experienced, time will shift your relationship to it. That problem that feels overwhelming, it's already changing even as you read this. But also, that thing you're proud of, impermanent. That identity you've built, impermanent. That certainty you hold, impermanent. This is harder to accept because we like our achievements and identities. But Buddha wasn't interested in what we liked, he was interested in what was true. No self, the teaching that makes your brain hurt. Perhaps Buddha's most challenging teaching is anatta, or no self. He suggested that what we call the self is actually a collection of constantly changing physical and mental processes, not a fixed, unchanging entity. There's no permanent, essential you at the core of your being. This sounds crazy until you look closely. What exactly is this self you're so sure exists? Is it your body? But your body is completely different than it was 10 years ago. Different cells, different shape, different capabilities. Is it your thoughts? But thoughts come and go like clouds. Is it your memories? But memories are notoriously unreliable and constantly being rewritten. Is it your personality? But that changes depending on context, mood, and life stage. Buddha suggested that the self is more like a river than a rock. A river has continuity. We can call it the same river, but it's never actually the same water. It's a process, not a thing. Similarly, there's a continuity to your experience, but no unchanging essence making that experience happen. Why does this matter? Because so much of our suffering comes from defending, promoting, and maintaining this fictional self. We suffer when it's criticized, inflated when it's praised, anxious when it's threatened. But if it's a process rather than a thing, if it's empty of inherent existence, then there's nothing to defend. The armor can be put down. This doesn't mean you don't exist. You obviously do in a conventional sense. It means you exist differently than you think you do. Less solid, more fluid, less separate, more interconnected, less permanent, more dynamic. Compassion, the natural response to understanding. What happens when you truly understand impermanence, suffering, and no self? You might expect a person to become cold or detached, but Buddha's response was the opposite. Immense compassion. When you realize that everyone is trapped in the same cycle of craving and aversion, that everyone is suffering in their own way, that everyone is doing the best they can with the understanding they have, judgment falls away, and compassion arises naturally. Buddha taught metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion, not as moral obligations, but as natural expressions of wisdom. When you see clearly, you naturally care. When you understand that the person who hurt you was acting from their own pain and ignorance, forgiveness becomes possible. When you recognize that you and all beings share the same fundamental challenges, connection replaces separation. This is why the Buddhist path is sometimes called the path of the open heart. Understanding opens the mind, and an open mind naturally leads to an open heart. The practice, because philosophy alone won't cut it. Buddha was adamant that his teachings weren't meant to be believed, they were meant to be tested through direct experience. He famously said, "Do not believe anything merely because I said it. Test it in the furnace of your own experience." This is why meditation became central to Buddhist practice. Not meditation as another thing to achieve or perfect, but meditation as a laboratory for observing the mind, seeing the patterns that create suffering, and gradually letting them go. Mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment without judgment, is perhaps Buddha's most enduring gift to the world. In a society that profits from keeping us distracted, anxious about the future, and regretful about the past, the simple act of being present is revolutionary. Words to live by. Buddha's greatest hit. Let's end with some of Buddha's most powerful teachings, the kind that can stop you in your tracks if you really hear them. You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. we're often harder on ourselves than we'd ever be on anyone else. Buddha says, stop that. You're part of all beings too. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Anger hurts the person holding it far more than the person it's directed at. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. It means not letting that behavior continue harming you through your own rumination. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. Your thoughts create your experience of reality. Change the thoughts, change the experience. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Stop looking for external circumstances to finally make you happy. That's a trap. The peace you seek is accessible right now, regardless of circumstances. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. An entire philosophy of life in one sentence. The awakening is now. Buddha's teachings point to something that's always available, the possibility of awakening in this very moment, not in some future time when you've finally meditated enough or read enough books or fixed all your flaws, but right now, in the midst of your imperfect, uncertain, beautifully messy life. The invitation is simple. Wake up, pay attention, see clearly, let go, love fully, stop creating unnecessary suffering. Recognize that this moment, whatever it contains, is the only moment you ever truly have. Buddha didn't claim to be a god or a savior. He simply said, I am awake. And then he spent the rest of his life pointing at the alarm clock, inviting others to wake up too. The alarm is still ringing. The question is, are you ready to answer it?